What's happening, MMA folks? It's your boy, the Max Holloway of acting slightly gay when confronted by pictures of Dustin Poirier. Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you post UFC 240. I bet you forgot it was a pay-per-view, if you didn't pay for it, that is. I'm actually going to say not a bad night. Shit on name power, as we said. Some of the prelims were rough. Main card was good. There were the two good fights, and then there was a couple of set-up fights, and then there was a couple of sloppy brawls, and it was all good. And then Ryzen were on, obviously, on Sunday at Croissant time. Actually, a little bit earlier than Croissant time this week. I don't know if that's because we're on summertime or because they started the event earlier. But anyway, let us do some news, and then we'll get into the fight shit. First cool bit of news, Nicolas Dalbey is returning to the UFC. That's a little bit sad because we're not going to get that conclusion to the fight with Houston. Again, I keep plugging this fight, but if you haven't seen it, it's on Fight Pass. It's probably on YouTube somewhere too. But that is the fight that stopped due to excess blood on the surface of the cage, as on the mat surface, and both men are just slipping all over it. It's exactly what it sounds like. You need to go watch it. But Nicolas Dalbey's always been a very good fighter. He had a good little scrap with Darren Till. Lots of people don't want to give him credit for that because Darren Till hurt his shoulder in that fight or something like that. But basically, Till pours it on early. Dalbey comes back late. Till gets the decision, but everyone went, ooh, maybe not the unbeatable prospect that everyone's advertising him as at the time. And of course, with Dalbey coming back, I was sad when they let Dalbey go. I'm sad now that they're not going to be able to do the Houston rematch. But with Dalbey coming back, that does leave room for the great Mads Burnell to re-enter the UFC featherweight division, slap the shit out of some of these guys in the top 15. What else is going on? Zuffa Boxing, they hired a chairman person, which was rumoured to be me, but isn't. They hired a dude to look after Zuffa Boxing, which you'll remember Dana White had trademarked, registered, whatever, months and months ago, and it was assumed that was just a shitty plan that fell through. Nope, they're actually going ahead with it. Apparently they're going to start doing some stuff in October, whether that's specifically boxing cards or if they're going to include boxing. Well, it'd be difficult to include boxing on UFC cards without putting them in the cage, and boxing in the cage does look kind of tacky. Could invite Tim Sylvia back to get his record up to 1-1 in cage boxing there. But anyway, I mean, it'd be interesting to see how that turns out. It could just be more content for Fight Pass, which they're also claiming they're going to relaunch in October, since ESPN owns all the rights to the events now, so you can't watch them. What else is interesting? Antonio McKee is coming back. Not AJ McKee. AJ McKee's dad, who wasn't an interesting fighter at the best of times, mainly famous for losing by TKO to Shinya Aoki, by submission to punch from Shinya Aoki. Shinya Aoki hit him with a punch on the feet, and he tapped out. And most recently, he trained Chuck for Chuck versus Tito 3, and when interviewed at the press conference, he said, I'll be honest, I always thought Chuck was racist. But he's coming back, and he's fighting an opponent, and the combined age of them is 96, which is just par for the course. It's Bellator. It's shit. What else is going on? Yair Rodriguez booked to fight Jeremy Stephens in September on that Mexico City card they're bringing Brandon Moreno back exclusively for. Yeah, good fight. I expect that's a winnable fight for Stephens. That's someone who is incredibly talented, but not going to fight smart, as opposed to someone like Zabit, who's incredibly talented, but finally realised that he would have to fight smart. Jeremy Stephens is that kind of gatekeeper. We always say it. He is tough enough, hits hard enough, difficult enough to take down, that if you don't do something clever, he's going to beat you, or at least give you a horrible time. I mean, the real lesson out of this is that Zabit Magomed Sharipov, after ducking Brian Ortega to get out of the UFC 240 card, ducking Yair Rodriguez right now. What's going on, Zabit? Come on. Gilbert Burns is going to welterweight. That's interesting. Had a good run at lightweight, but fair enough. If you think... The thing is that I don't like these guys going up, and when they've done so well at lightweight, suddenly being tiny at welterweight, like Rafael dos Anjos, the best pressure fighter in MMA at lightweight, suddenly goes up to welterweight, and he can't pressure dudes because they just step in and clinch him. Then there's the ongoing John Jones accusations, which we briefly whisked over last week. Basically, he's accused of choking a waitress at a strip club, but also touched the vagina of a stripper there but he hadn't paid for it, or something like that. It's very strange. The entire American thing with strip clubs is very strange, because some of them, the performer's allowed to touch you, others they aren't. So that's how they caught Stormy Daniels. They had an undercover guy whose job was to lunge at her, and if she didn't reject his advances, they'd arrest her. Proper odd, but that's just par for the course with Jon Jones. And of course, not decided on at this point, just being reported. And then the other hilarious story of the week, I think this happened late last week and I didn't touch on it. But one championship, having claimed that they've already started WADA testing and they're going to be WADA testing more in the future. And, Will Chope was like, no, they don't. And Martin Wynn, who's their featherweight champion at the moment, and is just the coolest guy. He's been 2-weight champion, was almost 3-weight champion in one. He's incredible. But he was like, oh, I just assumed everyone was drug tested because they take my pee, but apparently no one else has their pee taken. It was absolutely magnificent. But Will Chope famously said on Twitter, called Chattery out on it on Facebook. Chattery gave this ass-kissing reply where he was like, your combat sports experience is mind-bogglingly impressive, Will. I love you. And then they threatened him with legal action after agreeing to all the things that he said publicly. But since then, some guy, I can't remember his name, but it's the website's My MMA Show or something like that. But a good guy, because he went out and he talked to, I think it was Maggie Durand, who is the head of media relations for WADA, and he said, so are you actually getting more involved in one? And she was like, one, have never been associated with us. We've never done any testing with one. Are they saying that we have? And this guy had to link them all the shit Chattery's ever said about one. So, just more Chattery talking shit, selling a product, never being called out on it because he's got an army of just bizarre ass kissers all over social media. And when he gets on Joe Rogan, it's going to be so frustrating to watch Joe never say anything about this stuff. I don't know if he keeps up with it. He doesn't seem to know any of the one fighters. He just sees clips of them and goes, I love what they're doing over there, especially that no one cuts any weight and everyone is paid millions of dollars or something like that. But yeah, just more Chattery being Chattery. It's hilarious. Go look this stuff up because you actually can't believe it's real, and then it is. And also give that guy some hits because he did the digging and found out that the guy's just openly lying. So let's talk about these two cards I watched, Rising and the UFC. We'll talk about the UFC. There was some other stuff going on. Oh, yeah, there was a PFL thing. PFL, I'm going to be honest, guys, I would love to cover PFL, but it's the same with the Tuesday Night Contender Series. Midweek, I'm not able to watch things that are going on in the middle of the night, especially when I'm preparing for the week. Most of my stuff is geared towards getting workout before ideally before Friday and before Saturday. Everything is gearing up towards that weekend, and then you've got recaps immediately afterwards. I'm barely done with the recaps and I'm starting into my stuff for the weekend, and PFL/Tuesday Night Contender Series are happening then. It's also quite tricky to follow in the UK, but I would love to check out what they're doing. It's very interesting. They had a little scandal of their own because someone wasn't allotted the points that someone else was when their opponent missed weight. And while that's not a huge deal, you would think when you're advertising a tournament for $1 million, you would think that's a very big deal. And then we didn't even talk about that guy on Tuesday Night Contender Series who is having to use dog insulin. He buys dog insulin because he can't afford real insulin. And people were like, well, this is why we need a fighters union. And really the message there is, no, that's why you need actual health care in the US. That's just nuts. You should be able to, if you are diabetic and you don't have a job, you should be able to go and get insulin. That's fucking insane. The guy who made it or created insulin synthetically or whatever it is, the guy who could first produce, didn't they used to use pig pancreases for it? But the first guy to actually make insulin available to diabetics didn't patent it and very famously said insulin belongs to the human race, not to me. And now it's just crippling people with the expense of getting it. But yeah, go look up that story. I hope he won. I have not checked the results of the Tuesday Night Contender Series. Contender Series, really, I only see if there's someone coming into the UFC, and I go, oh, have they fought on the Contender Series? And I watch their fight on that. But anyway, we'll talk about the UFC 240 card first. I think overall this fight went, this night of fights went a lot more like I expected than most nights do. On any UFC card, you are likely to be surprised by a lot of people, but this was pretty much what I expected from most of it, to be honest. The one that really did surprise me was Figueiredo just turning it on and completely overwhelming Pantoja by the end. But most of it was the Canadian guys who were supposed to get their wins got their wins. Christophe Jotko and Marc-Andre Barriault had a boring fight. Armand Sakurian looked good against Olivier Aubin-Mercier and actually pulled the win in that one. And, in the main and co-main, the favourites won. So it was pretty by the book, but there was plenty of interesting stuff going on in it. I enjoyed seeing Eric Koch pick up a win. Eric Koch, I can never remember how it's pronounced, but that guy had the strangest career past. It's like guys like TJ Grant. There's been a few who were on the cusp of a title shot, and then just circumstances prevented them. Back in 2012, Koch had beaten 4 guys on the trot. In that time, he beaten Francisco Rivera and Rafael Assunção, who was difficult even back then at featherweight, and Jonathan Brookins, who was well regarded too. And then he was scheduled for a fight with Aldo. And for like half a year, that fight was scheduled and then cancelled and then rescheduled. And it was like this whole ongoing thing because he'd also had a fight cancelled with, I think it was Poirier. And let me check, who is it? Oh, and Lamas as well. So he had all these fights booked and he was out for like a year and a half. And then he just never rebounded. He went 1-3 in his next 4, and just never really got back on it. So it's good to see him back in the win column. Wasn't an amazing fight, but it's nice to see old names still doing it. Julian Robertson versus Sarah Frater was decent. Some fun stuff from the bottom here, like reverse triangles. Braulio Estima stuff, but without Braulio Estima's actual guard retention. And Braulio Estima, if you watch him shoot his reverse triangles, because he famously caught Andre Galvao with it at ADCC, and he made it famous basically. But Braulio Estima is famous for having a great guard, but he will also let you almost pass his guard to suck you into submissions. So if you ever see people in that position, there's almost, when you're recovering guard from side control, if you've got like one knee across their belly and one knee upright inside their shoulder, he would let people pass to that position and then snap into a reverse triangle or shoot for a knee bar on the near leg. Whereas Frater was very much sort of like the Liam McGeary, Jessica Penne sort of upside down triangles and shit, where you are completely past your guard and you just like, quick, throw my legs over my head and see what I catch. But I thought that was a decent fight nonetheless. Gavin Tucker beats Sungwoo Choi, which we said was pretty much expected, but he did his job. Hakeem Dawodo had a much harder time with Yoshinori Hori than I thought he would. I mean, looking down Hori's record, I was like, okay, decent enough. And I do respect people in Pancrase because I've watched some recent Pancrase stuff, and it's of a higher standard, some of it, than I sometimes give it credit for being. But Hori was interesting. He was doing sort of like the Kyotaro thing. Kyotaro was doing this in K1 against top-level kickboxers, and basically he just refused a kickboxing match. It was very peculiar, but it's kind of like the Machida thing. You just jog around the ring and make them follow you, and then at points throughout the round, you just step in with the right hand, straight down the pipe. It's like walking up the stairs in front of someone and then stopping, and they walk into the back of you. I mean, that's a silly game to play, but that's how it works. People just get used to you not being there as they go forward, and then you hit them. And he was really troubling Dawodo because Dawodo didn't really have any ring cutting at all. Like, he was just following. So Hori looked actually pretty good for the first 2 rounds, and I think it was the 3rd round, Dawodo managed to catch him, hit him with a left hook to the body right straight down the centre, and then flurried off that. I love that combination. There was a lot more of that in Ryzen in the main event, actually, leading with the body shot and then coming with the right hand after, or the rear hand afterwards. Good combination. Joe Louis knocked out the Cinderella Man, James Braddock, with something similar. He went to the inside of the arm instead. John Dodson knocked down a few guys back in the day with the left hook to the body, right straight to the head. Zarate, a famous gangly Mexican boxer. He famous for having like 2 streaks of more than 20 knockouts in a row. I think he's the only person to accomplish 2 separate streaks of that. But he was long and tall and gangly for his weight class, and he used to use the left hook to the body as a jab, as an initiator. So it is a cool little technique. But Dawodo just stayed all over him, hammered him with knees from the clinch. When he actually got a hold of him and could work in combination, it was really crafty, good stuff. The problem was that for most of the fight, he was just following him out in the open. And, there's no more obvious example of the need to be able to cut the ring, because the moment that he could get the combinations going, he was winning, and he scored the knockout with a head kick coming out of the clinch. He was doing he did that a couple of times, push off and high kick. It works to treat. It's Peter Wright's favorite. Peter Wright's had more head kick knockouts than Krokop, and he wasn't like anywhere near as flexible or quick with his high kicks. The way that he did most of them was just push people out of the clinch, because as soon as you're pushed, like shoved, your hands go down. It's just something people do when they're off balance. Their hands come down, and Ayats would kick you in the head while your hands were down. So Duodo gets it done, but there's a massive, that weakness might have been demonstrated in other fights, the inability to cut the ring, but Hori was just a glowing advertisement for that. Sometimes you get an inkling of someone's flaws, and they don't really get picked up on at large. Going back, especially preparing for like big title fights, you go back, watch people's fights, and you go, why is no one talking about this? This is a bit weird. But this one, like, the dumbest coach in the world could watch this guy's fight and go, oh, yeah, he really struggles when you move. Araujo versus Davis. I really liked Araujo in this one. Her striking was pretty crisp, I thought, even though Alexis Davis's striking has always been horrible. Yeah, decent, not bad. Actually, both women's fights on this card I quite enjoyed. Krzysztof Jotko versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Now, I have to apologise here because last week I said, Krzysztof Jotko, isn't he like 45? And I was actually thinking of Krzysztof Sosinski. That is because I have Polish name blindness. It's a common condition in the UK, especially if you have to deal with builders a lot. So I went into this fight feeling guilty. I was like, gonna watch this. Jotko's gonna stick in my mind now. This fight was just arse. So Jotko, who I clearly didn't remember from any of his previous fights, gets his second win on the trot by split decision in just a shit show of a contest. But when I thought he was Sosinski, I was like, wasn't he on UFC Undisputed, the very first one? Because he was one of those guys that you picked just to show off because their stats were so bad, like Steve Cantwell. I used to love playing Steve Cantwell because they also gave him a really weird moveset, which is what you should do with like really bad stat characters. It's a way of making things more interesting. And the saddest part is that Steve Cantwell wasn't bad. He had some great fights in WEC, and then he dropped off a little bit when he came to the UFC. Well, it dropped off as in, like, stopped winning fights, but he was good for a little while. So, yeah, Steve Cantwell in UFC Undisputed 1 is more interesting than this fight was. Let's go back to the undercard. I skipped one because I was going to talk about it because it's a really good fight. Deiveson Figueiredo versus Alejandro Pantoja. I said, this is the one. This could be fight of the night. And normally when I say that, it turns to shit in my mouth. But this was actually really good. And Figueiredo looked... Now, the first round, I thought, was a little bit more like Figueiredo versus Chusier Formiga, where the threat of Pantoja ducking in on his hips made it very difficult for him. He was a little bit, like, tentative. And this is the thing that you notice about Figueiredo. You look down his record and you go, damn, he's got some interesting stoppages. And then you go to watch him, and it's very hard to grab onto things. There are habits there, but a lot of the time, if he's on, he's on. And if he's not on, he doesn't do anything. He really is one of those guys who thrives when he's got his confidence and doesn't do anything when he's not, like, clearly connecting and hurting the guy. But Pantoja he ducked in on a double at one point and went straight to Figueiredo's back with the body lock, exactly like Formiga did. I was going, uh-oh, same again, the Formiga special. But Figueiredo, found his way out, started landing some blows, and he was doing this really neat little thing, stepping, like, back and to his left, back and to the left, back and to the left. He was stepping back to the left and, like, getting down behind his lead shoulder. And that's a really neat little move, because we always say, like, you have a very limited control over the opponent when you don't have a hand on them. That's why striking arts are a little bit tougher to control than grappling arts. Even in judo, if you're holding the gi, you have some control over them by the collar. You can move them about, create kazushi. In striking, when you're not connected to the opponent, one of the few ways that you can predictably move them is that if you take a step back, they're probably going to take a step forward because they don't want... they're going to re-establish a distance where they can start striking from or they can counter from. If you both take a step back, neither of you has accomplished anything. So if you take a step back, you can normally lead the opponent forward and start the dance. So what Figueiredo was doing was he'd step back, get down behind his lead shoulder, and if Pantoja came in swinging, he'd throw the uppercut, or he'd duck in on the hips. And he was able to hit some nice counter uppercuts. I think he knocked him down in the second round with one of those, but he also hit some nice counter takedowns, just dipped in on the hips, picked him straight up and knocked him over with his head. It was lovely. Fighting from that weird-ass stance. I can't remember what they said he'd done. It might have been like Hungar or something like that. Some people were saying that he might, he looked very karate-y, but I specifically remember last time I was looking into Figueiredo, it was something peculiar that he'd started in as a traditional martial art. But I thought his jab worked well. He only threw it a few times, but it came, he had his arm out straight and then he'd drop it and then he'd come up with it and catch Pantoja from underneath. But the thing that really got everyone's attention was the elbows, because they were boss. There was a stepping right upward elbow. There was he did the step back again and then came up with a left back up elbow, the Anderson Silva special. At one point, he was just like throwing dozens of elbows because they'd been working. But yeah, he's so much fun, Figueiredo. Really struggles getting his confidence. I think if you could set him up with someone who could teach him the jab and the inside low kick as building blocks, I think he'd do a lot better, because a lot of his game right now, until he's got his confidence or until he's hurt the person, is to just sort of swing the right hook. And the right hook is really like a specific punch, because if you come in level with the floor, like you would with a left hook, the opponent's shoulder is going to be in the way, even if they're shit at shoulder rolling. So, that's why the overhand tends to come in on an arc, or you time it over the top of the opponent's left jab. But he's just like swinging right, well, like Jeremy Stevens does, like clotheslines. And he did like a stutter step up running into it at one point, and I think that knocked down Pantoja, but he was already sort of like scrambling to get away then. But yeah, I think if you could teach him to pick with the jab a little bit more effectively, because he threw it effectively here. He just threw it like 3 times. It was the Cody Garbrandt situation. You could teach him to pick with the inside low kick and then come down off that with a big swing. I think he'd have a lot more success. But what I liked in one of his previous fights was that he went forward and he just, when he was worried about the guy taking him down, he was just throwing body shots. We talked about that last week. Big body shots are a great answer to the wrestler because they give you the underhook. And this is the thing that Figueiredo is going to have. Like, I think he keeps his hands down to stop takedown attempts. I think if he meets someone who is a little bit cleverer, well, think about the Henry Cejudo thing. Henry Cejudo is going to be looking to shoot straight right hands or straight left hands, depending on his stance, straight into your face, and he's going to be looking to duck in on your hips when your hands are up. So if your hands aren't up, he's just going to keep hitting you with straight right hands and straight left hands. He did Marlon Moraes with like 5 right hand leads in a row. But yeah, Figueiredo, very fun guy. I'm sure he'll get towards the title shot eventually, but with Cejudo in that odd spot of having 2 belts and also taking time off for a shoulder surgery, you could see Figueiredo versus Benavidez soon. That'd be a fun one. But I did say Figueiredo's the man to save the flyweight division, and that fight fucking saved this prelim card. So, there were some other good stuff on that, but this was a really good fight. And who knows, maybe we all start hiring Hungar coaches to come in and teach us this shit. If I had to pick 2 influences on my style, I'd say maybe Conor McGregor or Randy Couture, and then Shenmue 2. Oh no, Shenmue's Baji Chuan. Onion Baji Chuan. Or is it Bagua? Fucking Chinese martial arts are complicated. At least all Japanese and Korean striking martial arts are basically just karate. So what else went on? Oh, Arman Sakarian versus Olivier Aubin-Mercier. Good fun fight. Not nearly as good as the Makhachev fight, obviously, because that was a mile a minute. But so Sarukian did some interesting. He got kicked in the head and he got kneed in the head, and both times he took Olivier Aubin-Mercier down off it. He was like, "Yeah, I'll just eat that and take you down anyway." Doing some cool stuff. He got the back body lock in the first round. I think he did it again later, but Aubin-Mercier was going down to like a knee. And trying to sort of turn into him, scrape him off Robert Whittaker style. So he's on like one knee along the fence with the other foot up in front of him, bracing. And Sarukian was coming down to 2 knees and putting one foot behind the outstretched leg and then trying to just sort of sneak his foot along and peel it off the floor to lean, to take Aubin-Mercier's basing foot out. Lots of cool little stuff like that. Good fun fight. I felt like a little bit disappointed, but I think that was purely because I came into this off the Makhachev fight, having watched that again earlier in the week. So good on Sarukian. He is the Russian without the hype. Armenian Russian, isn't he? But yeah, he's all those people who were like, the Russians are coming, keep an eye on the Dagestanis. Not nearly as hot on this guy, but he's good fun. Looked a little small, I thought, to be honest, against Oben Mercier, but didn't. Did Oben Mercier fight at welterweight at one point? I can't remember. Speaking of welterweight, Jeff Neal versus Niko Price. Niko Price, like I said, strikes like Bob Sapp, where his shoulders and chest are too big to actually punch, so he's like swinging weirdly. But he did a decent job getting in on Jeff Neal and making it ugly rather than Jeff Neal picking him apart at range. There was an absolutely nuts moment where they both traded. I mean, this only happens in MMA, but you both trade a punch at the same time and get knocked down. That used to be like the rarest thing in the world, and now we see it like, two or three times every year in MMA. But Price was sort of being made to pay for his loopiness. Neal was hitting straight. Didn't look like he was hitting very hard, but he was hitting nice left straights. And then in the end, I think it was the ground and pound from the guard, which you very rarely see finish a fight, but I suspect Price was already pretty, ears ringing from what had happened on the feet earlier on. So Seibel versus Spencer. I told you this week, I was like, Felicia Spencer, rapidly growing on me. I was so not into this fight when it was announced. I was like, oh yeah, that's just to make the Bye Felicia meme. But the more I watched of her, because I watched all her Invicta fights, I was going, fucking hell, this girl's really fun. And also, she just doesn't give a shit. She clinically cannot give a shit. Which was fun coming into this, because, I was watching her get hit by people on the Invicta scene, and there was one decent hitter she fought, but obviously not a Cyborg style hitter, and she just didn't give a shit. She was like, oh, okay, you've punched me in the face, I'm going to go back to throwing weird taekwondo kicks while you do it. So she times everyone she fights with a body kick under their arm as they punch at her. But she doesn't have any power in her kick, so it doesn't do anything. And she tries to wheel kick everyone, tried to wheel kick Cyborg. I said before this fight, I was like, but that could all go away. She could turn up to fight Cyborg, be awed by fighting Cyborg and the power. Like Cyborg, the moment she got into a firefight with Amanda Nunes, was surprised by Amanda Nunes' power and fought differently and got super sloppy and then got face planted. And we talked about, even people like Valentina Shevchenko, when they fight Amanda Nunes, the fact that she's standing in front of a woman with man-style knockout power makes you fight very differently. But Spencer, even after getting beaten up for like 2.5 rounds, was like, nah, I'm going to wheel kick now. Just doesn't give a shit, and I love it. And she can really take a fucking shot. I think the thing about Cyborg, like I've said this before, I think, but to be honest, she wasn't actually in the Holly Holm fight. She looked crisper than she'd ever looked, and in that fight, she had some snap on her punches. But I think more often than not, she has more clubbing power than snapping power. And then we're getting into wushu bullshit here, but like the last when you get to about 80% of your punches path on say a straight, that's when your punch is moving at its fastest. You want to connect at 80%, drive through to like 90, 95, and then just pull the hand back once you've gone all the way through the motion. And, similar thing happens with the path of uppercut or a hook. You want to hit him at about 80%, get to 95, 100% of the movement, pull it straight back. Whereas Cyborg is very much like swinging all the way through. It's like the punch doesn't have any focus, and when people get hit, they're just clattered on the way through by it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, George Foreman just clubbed people, but that's what Muhammad Ali used to say. He used to be like, he just clubs them and pushes them over. It's a little bit different to say, well, think of Conor McGregor's left hand. It just lands perfect on that counter spot, and properly starches people as a result. But with Cyborg, it's always like, well, it was always those Vanderlei flurries, but she really has sharpened up her boxing under Perillo. But she still is, there's still some of that clubbing wildly, rather than finding the crisp punches. Did well in the clinch. That's where I thought, there's a bit of a grey area, because Holly Holm did very well in the clinch against Cyborg, but Spencer couldn't get her down, couldn't lift her, couldn't do it. I mean, lifting Cyborg's probably a big ask, because she was, you going into this fight, you were like, Felicia Spencer has a bit of extra weight. Chris Cyborg cuts off an arm and a leg to get to the top end of this weight class. But what I like about Spencer is, like I said, continuing the theme of not giving a fuck. When she fought Megan Megan Anderson. She was struggling to lock her hands around Megan Anderson. Megan Anderson was actually fighting off the hands well, and she couldn't get the high crotch grip. But Megan Anderson had a good overhook in. So what she did was she clamped down with her elbow on top of the overhook, reached for the leg, and dropped her back to do like the Lucas Leitch half guard sweep. She tried to sweep her from the standing position. And what happened was that Megan Anderson's hand popped out. She was able to base, but there was so much space that Felicia Spencer could then roll through and come up on a single leg, I think it was, or just pursue the back. But she'll do things like that. She's not just desperate to lift the person or trip them. If she can't take them down, she'll try and sweep them. So she pulled half guard in this one with the underhook and the knee shield, but didn't. Seibel just wasn't having it. But I thought good fight. People were well mad about Joe Rogan's commentary throughout this event. He did think it was 5 rounds, and to be honest, I thought it was 5 rounds. I completely forgot that. In my head, Amanda Nunes has already given up that belt, and they were like, yeah, fuck it, Cyborg's the champ again. Because what else point is there to this division? But I forgot, no, this is 3 rounds, and I could have done with 5 rounds. Felicia Spencer didn't look like she was going to get knocked out anytime soon. Compare this performance to, like, Lena Landsberg, or Kunitskaya, or Evinger. There was a very early point in those fights where you're like, uh-oh, they've realised they can't do anything. Now they're just going to try and survive. Whereas in this fight, it was like Felicia Spencer gets hit with an anvil and goes, okay, back to work. And you're like, fine. If it were a 5-round fight, fuck it. She might have got tired and got knocked out. She might have continued and Cyborg got tired and she got on her back at some point. Weirder things have happened. That's how Miesha Tate won the title from Holly Holm. To be honest, didn't care about Joe Rogan upsetting anyone this week. A lot of it is just Aldo fanboys, and they are literally the worst on Twitter. Like, I had a little rib at them this morning. And the worst part is, it's if you're on MMA Twitter at all, it's a group of fairly smart guys who know what they're talking about. Like, they discuss fights reasonably, but as soon as anyone says anything about Max Holloway maybe being the featherweight GOAT or something like that, they just lose their shit. It's like, oh, Joe Rogan pushing the company line. And you're like, the company loves Jose Aldo. He was never a huge draw, but they do like him, and he gets the respect that he deserves every time he fights. They're like, the greatest featherweight of all time. And then when Max fights, he's the greatest featherweight of all time. It's the fucking pound for pound thing all over again. Whoever's up next, they're the best. But the only thing that Joe said that hacked me off in this entire card was when he was talking about, in the main event, which we'll now talk about, Holloway was coming in behind the jab. We were saying maybe a more conservative performance necessary from Holloway, and I think that's what you got. He was going forward, but he was mainly doing 1s and 2s. It wasn't the usual, it wasn't the Brian Ortega, just hundreds of punches in the face. It was behind the jab, and then the jab into the uppercut, and the uppercut came right up the center. Beautiful stuff. And a lot of the time he'd throw the uppercut up and forward, and it sort of stopped about chest height if Frankie wasn't ducking in. But obviously Edgar, his thing is level changes to body shots. He does those up-down flurries, and they dull your reactions for the actual level changes onto your hips. Whereas Holloway, here, he was staying behind the jab, which is a hard weapon to shoot under if you're good at it. And then when he did throw his right hand, it was very rarely the right straight. It was often the right uppercut, just to keep Frankie up or catch him if he ducked. Gray Maynard hurt him with that back in, was that fight number 2? Yeah, fight number 2. I was saying, thank God Herb Dean wasn't reffing that one after that Aspen Ladd fight, because the second Edgar Maynard fight is the one where Frankie got dropped. I think it was 3 times in the opening round, and then like 3 more times throughout the fight, but still came back to get a draw, I think it was. It was absolutely nuts. And if you ever wondered why people are always on about Frankie's heart, and you've only seen him in like the modern era, that fight is probably the best example. But anyway, Holloway was using this uppercut, and Joe Rogan was going, he's using the uppercut, that's good, because Frankie often ducks in on his hips, and I'm going, yeah, good analysis there, Joe. He goes, just like Brian Ortega. This whole week I've been watching that Brian Ortega fight, going, fucking hell, he got a little bit lucky there. The thing he did do well, he's getting outstruck by volume, but Frankie doesn't hit very hard, and Ortega does hit well. But the thing he did was land a beautiful intercepting counter elbow, and then the rest was just garbage that happened to hit Frankie. Like that was when Edgar was out. And if you watch the uppercut, Edgar is standing upright. They're coming out of a clinch. Ortega throws the uppercut at the ceiling and it just manages to clack Edgar's jaw on the way by. Edgar's not changing level. It's not taking advantage of Edgar's usual vulnerability for the uppercut. It's just him swanging a bus driver uppercut and going, "You going to jail now!" Sorry, if you don't know what video I'm referencing, it's a legendary internet fight video. But yeah, so that was the only bit that Joe said that hacked me off. But really good performance by Holloway. And again, Edgar finds the low kick. It works. His corner identify it, and then he doesn't do it. Like, he would leave the corner, hit it 3 times, return to it once towards the end of the round, and that'd be it. Like, he'd start the round low kicking, forget about the low kick, and throw the punches again. You're going, the leg is right there, Frankie, please. K1 Frankie. Frankie, if he trained with Ernesto Hoost for a month before he fought Aldo or Holloway, completely different story, mate. Just annoying, but again, hard to low kick when Holloway's backing you up all the time, obviously. But what would happen when Edgar came forward was that Holloway would often drop away, and that's when you get the low kick. The thing with Aldo, obviously, was that he would drop away or pivot offline. Both of those ripe for low kicking. Pivoting, especially if you kick someone's leg when they're pivoting, really good chance you jar it on just one kick. But what you saw Edgar do, he hit his little pickup, which we did in the Filthy Casuals guide a couple of times. You can't see me doing it. I'm doing it. Like you can see me, and that's actually explaining it. But the lead hand into the shoulder, right hand behind the knee, push forward, pick up the leg. He did that a couple of times, and he used it also quite nicely to take off the pressure. He did that to Jeremy Stephens too, when Stephens was just staying in his face, and he needed to make a little bit more movement and create some space. He just did that. It's a completely non-committal takedown. I mean, it does sort of throw off the takedown attempt stats when you see Edgar's got like, I think of that Stephens fight, he has like 25 attempted, 4 completed. But those ones, the whole point of them is that they don't really take much effort. You're not going to get stuck under a sprawl or snapped down into a front headlock or forced to pay for it. It's a very nonchalant takedown attempt. And he does it to Holloway. I think it was in the 4th round. Does it to Holloway. Holloway does it right back. It was fantastic. I mean, it wasn't nearly as good as Frankie's, because Frankie's been doing it his whole career. But it was just cool to see Holloway do that. Excellent performance from Holloway. The thing that Frankie's always had is that, like, everything works beautifully together. The striking sets up the takedowns. The threat of the takedowns set up the striking. But if he can't decide where the fight's happening, he tends to sort of like lose a lot of confidence. That was the sort of fight where you needed to make something work on the feet, whether that's the low kicks or just finding something else. Or just biting your mouthpiece and getting into a scrap with him on the inside. That was the fight where he really needed to make something happen on the feet in order to get the takedowns working. And he was sort of just, he'd throw 2 punches and then shoot on the hips or ducking on the hips and not get the takedown. He was just doing the same thing over and over again. There was no real change up. And I think that's the thing about Frankie's style. It's so clever the way the 2 things work together, but he can't just do one on its own very well. And the other thing was, like, he was pursuing these takedowns towards the ends of rounds, and he got the takedown, I think it was like 30 seconds left in round 3, and goes back to the corner, and Mark Henry goes, "We won that round, it's now 2-1. And you go, no. Even, firstly, like, that's the way they used to score fights. A takedown would win the round, but you got beat up before that in that round, so probably not. Maybe if nothing had happened in that round, then you got the takedown. Maybe. But you did nothing with the takedown. The takedown ended, and the round ended with Holloway sat on the fence waiting to pop up the moment that Frankie moved. So, I mean, Mark Henry does do some baffling things as a coach, like the calling for the downward elbow that he knew was illegal in the Alvarez fight, saying that Conor McGregor would definitely beat Mayweather because he'd never seen anyone handle Eddie like that. Like, that's not the same thing. Saying that Zabit is going to win a world title, and then before Zabit won a world title, saying that Zabit's brother is going to win the world title. He's a strange dude, but he's been with Frankie forever, and they clearly work well together. But he does, some of the decisions he makes are very peculiar. Anyway, good fights, I thought. We get back into the GOAT debate because they say that Holloway is like the best featherweight. I mean, there's a good argument that Holloway is the best featherweight of all time. That's not to say that he's better than Aldo. He beat Aldo in a fight, and I think if you take prime Holloway versus whenever Aldo you want, I think he wins, because his style specifically is very difficult for Aldo to deal with. But when Aldo was at his best, the division was one full of wrestlers with power doubles, and Aldo's whole game was just to counter wrestle. And we don't really see Holloway do that much. it'd be interesting to see Max Holloway versus prime Chad Mendes. You know, prime Chad Mendes is not a very slick or savvy fighter, but he does have that power double. Uriah Faber, you know, just the overhand and the double leg. You know, those things, that was what guys relied on back in the day, and Jose Aldo came along and said, nah, you're not doing it, mate. Holloway's fought a lot more sort of all-rounders, lots of strikers, people like that. I mean, Aldo's problems were always more with the strikers than they were with the grapplers, even before Conor McGregor came along and people like that. His main thing was being an amazing anti-wrestler. Is he the GOAT of the featherweight division? Is Max Holloway the GOAT of the featherweight division? Does it matter? Ultimately, no. Even if you put in an ELO system, ranked all their opponents as they were in the division at the time, you know, no one would be happy with the result anyway. I think really what you just need to do is learn to appreciate fighters for what they do, who they are, and how they deal with the landscape of their division at the time. I mean, I get that some people love those arguments, but there's just not much interest in it for me. And it tends to come down to people getting just irrationally angry about how one very, very good fighter might have been better than another very, very good fighter. I mean, when you get down into like the disrespect factor, you just like grow up. It's whenever someone says anything about like Max Holloway maybe being the featherweight GOAT, Twitter is just full of people going like, oh, Aldo is so neglected, underrated, blah, blah, blah. Everyone knows how good Jose Aldo was. It's not, well, I mean, everyone knows how good Demetrius Johnson is, or was, both. I didn't mean to say that in like a catty way, but even more so with Aldo. Everyone knew how good he was. You know, you're getting, it's like, I think it's like a lash back against the 13 seconds people, because Conor McGregor fans, up there with Khabib Nurmagomedov fans as like the worst people in MMA. I think their overdoing of the Aldo thing really undid it. I mean, like I've said before, I wrote 10,000 words on Aldo in Notorious, and a lot of it got cut because they were like, we don't want to spend too much time talking about a guy who only lasted 13 seconds. And I'm like, the significance of the 13 seconds is that it's Aldo. and they just didn't get it. What are you going to do? Maybe I've just made an argument for being butthurt. I don't know. Fuck, no, we can't leave. I've forgotten to talk about Rising. If you missed it, there was a Rising preview for the Patreon boys. I got that up on Friday night, Saturday morning, can't remember. But, it was Friday night. There were some good fights on this card. There were some squash matches. You know, I'm seeing people on Twitter, on Reddit being like, oh my god, Seo Ham is a killer. And you're like, look at her opponent's fucking record, you moron. But, and the same was true for, Ivan Strykov, the Ural Hulk, or the next Fedor, depending on who you are. They put him in with a guy who was 10-12, so obviously going to get smashed. But, you know, some interesting stuff going on. Roberto Satoshi, or Roberto De Souza, depending on what you want to call him, wins a fight over Hirota, you know, a guy who is known for being a banger, knocks him out. You're like, what? This jiu-jitsu savant, who was known for like a pretty... Well, if you saw Satoshi's jiu-jitsu, I think you'd probably be like, oh, this guy, he's just everything that's wrong with sports jiu-jitsu. Because he did a lot of like spinny stuff, inverty stuff, De La Riva stuff, reverse De La Riva stuff. And his takedown game was to dive on a low single from way on the other side of the mat. He's just like, he's totally not the sort of guy you would expect to excel in MMA. And he's doing it, and he's knocking dudes out. It's just crazy. So, actually, on the subject of Seo Ham, because I didn't touch on it too long, but I mean, the girl she was fighting was completely overmatched. It was silly, but she looked awesome in her gear. Like, her gear looks professionally tailored, whereas everyone else, well, you know, you get lots of colours in Rise, and you get more interesting stuff. But Seo Ham's stuff, like gear, just shits all over the gear she was on in the UFC. And I'm talking about her clothes gear, not the other gear that, you know, it's Rising, but she's looking pretty great. Yeah, every time I watch a Rising card, it just reminds me how much I love colour and you know, interesting things about fighters rather than just the uniform. If there was ever a sport that didn't need a uniform, it's the individual sport of fighting. What else was good on this card? My boy Hikaru Machida with his Iedo punch lost to Tiger. Shame. Ogi Kubo beat Matoya. Olka Sasaki looked pretty good until he lost, but came out doing like a Kyoji Horiguchi impression. And Shitaro Ishiwatara, who beat him, a good, solid fighter. In fact, a very good fighter when he's not fighting Kyoji Horiguchi. You know, I think the first I saw him at length, I'd seen a Pancrase fight of his against Jonathan Brookins, but the most I saw him at length was in that Bantamweight Grand Prix with Kyoji, and obviously Kyoji's stealing the show, and he gets to the finals and gets starched by Kyoji. But when he's not fighting Kyoji, he's very, very good. And in the main event, you had Mikuru Asakura versus Yusuke Yachi. I call him Yusuke, sorry. Yusuke Yachi. Yachi, if you've never seen him fight, I put this in my preview, but he uses a check right hook, and he turns all the way around when he throws it. So he can starch people outright, like Darren Caldwell? No, Darren Cruikshank. But he also, he doesn't have enough. There's not a lot there. So he couldn't get Asakura running onto this check hook. So he's just throwing out flicky kicks. And Asakura is stepping away from them, letting them fall short. Then he parries one and steps in with a body shot. And then just, Asakura could comfortably hit him with straights and kicks and things, whereas Yachi had kicks that were just there for show, and then this big right hook which he could never time. Finally started going for some takedowns, but is no setup at all. But the ring got in the way a fucking again, because it's just terrible. He got Asakura off his feet 3 times, and 3 times Asakura threw his elbow through the ropes and held himself up with his armpit. The old Fedor. That is grabbing the ropes and using them to hold yourself up by any definition, but it happens all the time, and it's happening more nowadays because people have realised you can get away with it. They just go, oh, his arm fell through the ropes, he wasn't holding. And Jason Herzog, official referee of the Fights Gone By podcast, was terrible with this. He didn't do anything, didn't deduct a point, didn't stop him, just let it go on. But then, when you're fighting in the ring, you're like, the ring's shit, sorry, we're just going to have to keep going. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for today. We'll be back later in the week for some One stuff. We'll be previewing Jonathan Haggerty versus Rod Tang and some other One stuff for the Patreon boys. Probably going to do a Haggerty study, might be separate from that, but Haggerty's an interesting guy because he's just started beating the best Muay Thai guys in the world, took the One title, took everyone a bit by surprise, and he's almost local, so I'm going to have to write about him. If you want to get in on the Patreon, help support the podcast, allow me to do these, get extra stuff for being a boy, feel free to do so. Can't do it without your help. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing, either independently or for another site, all of it is linked on thefightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, the actual featherweight goat. Cheers!